Hello and welcome to Xena Warrior Podcast. My name is Vera and I'm joined as always by my two humanoid co-hosts.
Oh, okay.
Katie and Livy. You're not even going to say hi. You don't like being humanoid.
Katie's really offended by humanoid. That's a good word to pick.
For the
chose
price.
It
for a reason.
So we're not human, we're humanoid. We appear human, but we're something else. We're just voices in your ears, guys. We're not humans.
Don't think about our feelings, okay? Well, we're talking about The Price, which is episode 220, written by Steve Sears.
Steve actually wrote this episode, and then also the next episode that's coming up next week. And they're both really good. Steve Sears is on fire, y'all.
Steve doubleheader. And this one's directed by Oli Sasson, who is, I think I have to apologize to TJ, but I think Oli gets the cream of the crop on, the best episodes, all of them.
Well, when we talked about TJ, we spoke of him as he lays the foundations for the visual vocabulary of the show. I feel like Oli comes in and just, gets to use those foundations and build and build. So, you need TJ to come in and set up, but then Oli gets to do all of the most classic episodes. In a row, almost.
Yeah, it's crazy. I didn't think about it. I mean, I looked him up. I know him from The Dead. He's the guy who did The Deads. That's huge in the Xenaverse and everything like that. But I was just shocked at how many, really awesome episodes this guy did. I mean, he only did a handful, 5 or something.
Yeah, and they're all in the 3rd season except for this one.
Yeah. But this one in itself is pretty huge.
This one is huge. And in my mind, it is very connected to TJ's first episode.
Yeah.
Beware of Greeks Bearing Gifts, the Troy episode, which also was about a town under siege. TJ there was really expanding the scope of what Xena could do. There was that huge fort set. You really saw all of it.
Yeah, the walking on the ramparts.
Right. You saw the ramparts. You saw inside various areas within the fort. You saw the battlefield outside, which was strewn with skeletons. You had this real sense of scale. And I think Oli is doing something similar in The Price, but going even further with it.
Yeah, it's interesting that you bring up that episode because they kind of do have a similarity in the sense that when Zena and Gabrielle first arrive at Troy, they pass this field of dead bodies, some of which are crucified in the style of, that we saw here. And you really dealt with the concept of war there because the battle between the Trojans and the Greeks was so epic. It's literally an epic.
Mm-hmm. One of the first.
Yeah, exactly. In that episode, you already saw soldiers struggling with the concept of war and losing their humanity as personified by Perd and his issues.
What would you guys say are the characteristics of Oli's directing style?
Apocalypse Now.
This episode.
And The Dead.
Yeah.
He loves it.
I would have said, he has this heightened grittiness, which might just be another way of saying Apocalypse Now. Yeah, he brings just a lot of realism, I feel, to his battle scenes specifically.
Yeah, that's a good word for that.
His episodes are really big. I mean, he did The Deliverer and also Bittersweet.
Damn!
All of his episodes deal with massive Xena, Gabrielle issues at heart.
Yeah, kind of their biggest conflicts,
yeah.
I would say. This episode particularly is kind of dealing with the show's themes distilled.
He gets to play with Xena's darkness a lot in his episodes as well.
Yeah, he almost does Xena behaving badly. Those are his episodes.
To me, that's the heart of the show, Xena teetering that line always. So he really got a good crop.
So The Price is on Whoosh's list of the 12 best Xenas of all time. At number 12. I think it's in my top 10, maybe.
I think
for
it's
sure.
One of my favorite episodes ever. Top 3, maybe.
I think that came about via rewatch, though.
I think this episode should be higher than The Quest.
Yeah.
Back to my vendetta.
I agree. Well, just because, this is so well made and well written, well directed, well acted.
I kind of wish this was the season finale. I think season 2 really kind of loses. I mean, it's the only season really that doesn't have like even a fake season finale. Like season 1 had like the really intense Xena and Gabrielle. Is there a doctor in the house?
Do you think maybe they would have been afraid of it being too similar in its...
I don't know. Every TV show ends their seasons on a crazy epic thing that's really personal for their characters.
I mean, Gabrielle even kind of references it in the episode when she's like, here we go again.
Yeah. I would have changed the order of these things. I really would have.
I mean, in my mind, The Price is the season finale.
Well, it's not in reality.
Yeah, but I mean, in the same way that the first season is strangely structured with Callisto, which feels like the all guns blazing, like let's go all out finale, is nowhere near being the season finale.
But it's not personal. Doctor was personal for Xena and Gabrielle.
Doctor's personal, but it's a very intimate, small episode, a bottle episode, as we discussed. Whereas here again, we have The Price, which is huge production values, all out, and then also has this, as Katie said, a great distillation of Xena's major themes, and I think a great meditation on the power and importance of Xena and Gabrielle's relationship.
Yeah.
So in some ways, it's taking all of the epicness from Callisto and combining it with the personal stuff from Doctor.
Juicy.
It's really juicy.
And should have been last. Well, let's talk about it. So this begins with a really great imagery of New Zealand, but aka wherever in Greece they are.
Right, of course.
They're apparently in the rainforest of Greece.
That's right. You got all these amazing helicopter shots of like the river and greenery and really great music.
Yeah.
I really think the music in this episode is fantastic.
It's very evocative and different than anything they've done before, I think.
Yeah, I have in my notes that the difference in the music, plus the slightly different terrain, this much more lush, exotic greenery, immediately signals to you, the viewer, that they are somewhere else.
Yes.
That we're not in a typical Xena location. We've traveled.
And then you have this great kind of action scene. You got like lots of handheld quick shots of feet stomping around in the dirt, and then Xena and Gabrielle, you have dialogue that's like, he's moving to your right, I see him, let me take it.
This one's mine.
Yeah, what's going on, guys?
They're fishing.
It's another one of these openers.
Yeah, it actually did remind me of the insinuating fishing scene in Altered States, except there you think it's a sex scene and it turns out to be a fishing scene. Here we have an action scene that turns out to be fishing. Fishing can be mistaken for a lot of things. But I like that this is almost like you're setting up this sense of threat, even though what's actually happening is quite domestic and cute and comic.
Yeah, but I really loved Xena's intensity in this. I mean, we know, much like Rob, she takes fishing seriously. But I really thought that her lines of let me take it, were, really legit. Like, she likes to drive when fishing.
And while doing a lot of other things, too.
But she likes what Gabrielle does.
Yes. I love what Gabrielle does here, where she talks to the fish and says, I don't do this for pleasure, only to live, which feels very thematically apt for this episode.
Yes.
Yeah.
There's a few of those in this open.
Yeah, this open really is, despite being very silly and lighthearted, it really is a great way of beginning to introduce these themes of violence and
humanity,
death and humanity.
I mean, you already see the fundamental difference here where Gabrielle apologizes to the fish that she's going to eat. And Xena's like, don't talk to your breakfast. That's the thing,
Xena doesn't see the fish as being something you talk to.
Exactly. And Gabrielle then starts going on about her theory of fish, which is that they came from the ocean.
Which means that they're people. Hence her talking to it. She sees some kind of force that you can understand and empathize with in a fish.
Aww.
Yeah, she says that we all came from the ocean, meaning that every person is from the same origin. Can we talk about like her double braids for 20 minutes or so?
That seems like a good amount of time.
Okay, cool. Gabrielle has these great double braids that are tied in the back, and they look so cute, and I love it to pieces.
Is this
This is a great
episode
look.
only look, or does it come back? I
The
feel
double
like,
braids?
Yeah, I feel like it's kind of to this episode. I don't
Perhaps.
remember it really.
Somebody will correct us.
Yeah.
But it's certainly, I feel like the first time I've seen it, this particular style, and I like it.
I do love when they try new hairstyles.
Yes.
Randomly.
Me too. I mean, I feel like if they're not doing anything, I'll be bored.
Do you think they braid each other's hair?
Yes.
I mean, how else does it get so neat and nice?
Yeah.
Oh, you think Xena did it?
Yeah.
Okay,
Xena
cool.
did it first.
What?
I don't know.
A guy comes out of the river.
Yes, they catch him.
And it's really amazing.
Very
While
scary.
she's saying this whole thing about how humans
People
were,
came
yeah.
from the water. They pull one out.
Yeah, it's really terrifying.
It is very, very shocking.
Yeah, the cuteness of this opening immediately. That's it. We're no longer cute for the rest of
no more. Well,
episode.
yeah, pretty
And
much.
the sound design really helps to increase that sense of threat, that you just immediately have these weird noises on the soundtrack that come about from them pulling this guy up.
Yeah, I think right from the word go here, you see in the sound design, in the editing, in the acting, the threat level is so high that it's a lot scarier, I feel like, than any other Xena prior to this. Like,
when
you
you see-
really
yeah.
feel like they are immediately in a very scary danger that they haven't been in before.
Especially when you see Xena being scared.
Right.
You're scared. Like,
Yeah.
that's the key.
And
She
you really
sells
haven't
it.
seen
Yeah.
that.
I have a lot of conflicted feelings about the Horde themselves. Their look, obviously, is one thing. I think they work best as a villain when you see them only in flashes, as you do in this opening scene in the river. Like, I think it's very effective because you almost don't know what it is that's threatening them. And
You don't know what it is, or you don't
Yeah.
really know where they are.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that fear
Yeah.
of the unknown is always really scary and effective.
Well, that's the whole point of this
Yeah.
whole episode and
Yeah.
the influences of this episode.
Mm-hmm.
Fear of the unknown.
On top of that fear of the unknown and the way that it's shot and edited to minimize the actual physical presence of the Horde, Lucy's acting, the fact that you see on her face this stark terror, just absolutely is a game changer. You immediately know this episode is something different, and you're nervous.
Yeah.
Yeah, you said at the beginning as well how it was the opening shots were a signal that we're in a new place, and they even talk about in the dialogue in the opening that they are somewhere where Gabrielle feels like they're the first people to ever be.
Okay, that's
Yeah,
important.
an unfished river. So you have this sense of them, having gone outside of civilization, which, as we will soon see, like is sort of a reference to some of the source materials that inspired the price. This idea of going somewhere remote, somewhere where the rules don't apply.
The civilized rules, you mean?
Yeah,
Yeah.
outside of Western civilization, I
Right,
should say.
exactly.
Yeah.
So you mentioned some of the scary imagery. You have bodies floating in the river. That's pretty scary.
Yeah,
Yes.
not great.
In
Not
a,
great,
in a
Bob.
perfect line. It's
Yeah.
very disturbing. You just see these corpses scooting on by.
So the guy that popped out of the water, in his last breaths almost, was saying stuff like, "The garrison is surrounded, the Horde," which immediately Xena is like, "Oh shit."
Right.
She knows what this is, and she's fucking scared.
And she tells Gabrielle to run, just right
Yeah.
away. There's no, like, we should investigate. No, like, let's find out more. It's just like, let's get the fuck out of
Yeah,
here.
Gabrielle's like, "Your sword." And she's like, "My sword can't help us now," which, again, also is really...
Yeah, when do we hear
Unsettled.
Xena ever say that? I mean, I know in
Never.
Dreamworker, Steve Sears laid down the rules of what you should do in a conflict, one of which is run away. But we never see Xena following those rules.
Well, now you do. So they're in a canoe now, and they're paddling. And
I love the canoe stuff.
I love the canoe stuff, too. I mean, again, we already mentioned Lucy is really playing Xena as completely unsettled. Every time Gabrielle says something and Xena reacts with, "Be quiet, keep rowing," is just such new territory here. Like, we've never seen her behave this way towards Gabrielle.
Right, she usually likes bantering with Gabrielle in the middle of danger. That's such a Xena thing, to have a danger so threatening that Xena's just like, no funny business.
Yeah, and the fact that Xena's so freaked out makes Gabrielle even more freaked out than
She's
she
very
normally would be.
confused, yeah. Especially because they see, on the shores, they see these Athenian soldiers crucified, which is, again, an amazing and terrifying image. Goes with the bodies in the water. And they're calling out for Athena with their last dying breaths. Gabrielle, her instinct is to help them. And usually that's exactly what they do. But here Xena's like, no, shut up.
This
is
yeah.
serious.
She knows the threat, right? And she's already becoming very practical.
Yeah, and practical to the point of seeming heartless. I noticed that, rather than being crucified on the traditional cross, they're on a cross turn so that it's an X.
Right, that's the kind of crucifixion you saw in Greeks bearing gifts, that kind of stuff. It's not the Caesar.
Well, I feel that is.
Yeah.
They very deliberately said this isn't the Romans. This is something else. Yeah, this little detail that recalls the Romans, who are, a big threat. I think it's nice that they dabble a little bit in that imagery here.
Right.
But the way that cross is depicted tells you this is not that. This is something else.
And Zena herself, as a survivor of a crucifixion, obviously knows that these guys want to be rescued, and it's a really big deal when she's like, these men are dead already. Like, that's really hardcore.
So now we see our first Hordesman slowly emerging from the water.
What if I say this is my favorite shot of the whole episode? Is that weird?
Maybe.
Because he's not Xena or Gabrielle.
It's a little problematic.
Oh!
That's one.
But it's so amazing.
It's a great shot.
It's just terrifying.
He looks like a crocodile.
He does look like a crocodile, but the thing that you see first, right? Because he has a headdress on that's really, really large. That takes a really long time to come up. So you're like, what am I seeing? What am I seeing? What am I looking at? What is this? Because you're expecting a face, and it's not, and you just can't make sense of it because it's also in slow motion. And then, the face comes up and you're like, wow, this is really scary.
This is a person, not a monster.
So that's the Apocalypse Now.
Yeah, I mean, that's a big famous shot from Apocalypse Now. The whole sequence, I think, they've already been in their canoes, but like the second time they get in the canoe, I feel like is especially, it comes after this shot. You have this very unsettling stillness to them going down the river, and then these pans across the banks of the river. Very Apocalypse Now.
And the appearance of the crucified men on the shore is very similar to Colonel Kurtz's encampment, where you have all these just like limbs and heads strewn around.
Yeah, and even on the river, they see heads on spikes. Again, a lot of this stuff is going to come back in the dead.
Yeah.
Especially the actual shot from Apocalypse Now of somebody rising from the water.
But we are headed into a real
Who's gonna
heart of
be an
darkness
assassin? Yeah.
territory.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Into the heart of darkness.
Here we go.
Yeah, join us.
So other shots you see of the Horde, camouflaged soldiers in
the banks.
Yeah, on the banks in the bushes. Like
From a
opening their
distance.
eyes, like really scary.
Again, a
Very
little
threatening.
bit like crocodiles, covered in mud, and all you see are the flashes of the eyes. Yeah, they're beautiful shots, and they really like stoke your paranoia because you're just like, is that a person? Whoa, where are they coming from?
Yeah.
They're all over.
Well,
this
that's the
entire
Horde,
landscape is people.
They're surrounded.
Yeah.
That's what they do. That's how they work, as Zena says. She does see the chieftain, and he's like, I don't know, threatens her from the bank.
He's like nunchucking his machetes. He's just like, poo, 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 so many machetes.
Are they being chased now?
Yes, by Hordesmen also in canoes. So you have this cool canoe chase.
Zena stops that axe from getting Gabrielle right in the side of the face. That would have been bad. It was so close.
And Xena also sinks one of the canoes with a chakram, which I thought was a pretty awesome use of the chakram.
Good move.
Yeah.
It's weird because this whole episode is about how she doesn't see humanity in these guys, but, when they're about to sink, they panic. That's human. Like, it's crazy that she doesn't see anything there.
Well, we see it.
Yeah.
She's not.
Her
She's
fear
very
of these
concerned with
people
survival.
clouds her senses of them. It's interesting, yeah, that we, like, even in that shot that you love, Vera, of the guy coming out of the water, and at first you can't even tell it's a guy, but if you keep watching, it's very clearly a human being.
Yeah.
So I feel like even your reaction to that shot is an
But he's-
encapsulation of the episode.
When we watched that, you mentioned how it looked like Xena coming out of the water in altered states. Which again, the number one, the key scary part was just like the hair coming out there too, you know? It's very terrifying. I think I'm just afraid of that.
Well, it is. We talked about it as the monstrous feminine,
Yeah.
taking a human being and turning them into a monster, something unknowable.
Yeah.
So yeah, it makes sense that that imagery is repeated here, and in Apocalypse Now, for that matter.
Let's talk about Xena's history with the Horde. She definitely has encountered them before.
When she and her men went west.
Again, questions.
Yeah,
Where
where?
west?
West is a general clue term as to what kind of story we're in, maybe.
Right. So you want to talk about the looks of the Horde.
I think maybe we should.
I'm going to reach for a
Just-
coin preemptively.
I think we should all reach for a coin.
Yeah, all right. The
Let's
three of
just-
us at once.
At once, simultaneously. Boom. All right. What do you guys think the Horde is made up of? Many influences go into this.
I think they borrowed from a lot of different styles for the looks of the Horde that I couldn't even pinpoint myself.
Well, definitely
You know.
some island,
Definitely island, African, tribal
Yeah.
looks.
but also mixed in with
Native
Native
Americans.
Americans.
Native
big
American,
time.
yeah.
Especially like going west,
Yeah.
Right.
right?
That's a good point.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was so confused by the reference to going west. At first I was like, are they the Gauls? You know, the barbarians who
No.
menace the Romans?
Clearly no.
And I was like, oh,
Clearly
did she
no.
go? Did she go west, like all the way by Spain, down all the way around Africa to end up in an island? Like, what's going on?
I mean, the whole choice in this episode to have the Horde be nomadic is interesting and is very different from Apocalypse Now or any of these stories about colonialism, because this actually isn't a story about the Athenians invading the Horde's territory
No.
and the Horde being on defense. Like, this is seemingly an accident. The Athenians are far from home, and so are the Horde.
Why do they have a fort there?
We don't never know. They have a garrison there.
Is it because we're in Greece somewhere?
I
And they
mean,
belong
it's
there?
so unclear, but we're in virgin territory that hasn't been fished. So, I mean, you definitely see in some of these cues imperialist overtones that we're in some exotic place with an indigenous people who are fighting back. But when we actually hear about the Horde, they don't come from this place. So there's mixed signals a bit with what it is we're actually looking at.
It's kind of the translation from the influences to the Xenoverse. There are interesting questions there.
You bring up a really interesting point about whether or not, like, who is in whose territory. And I just cannot imagine an Athenian garrison setting up a fort if they're not trying to take over something or explore something that doesn't really belong to them.
I mean, that's the only reason you set up a garrison. It's your home away from home. Clearly, the Athenians are imperialists. They've pushed out from Athens and set up camp here.
Right, so these guys are in the Horde's territory, essentially.
They may not think they are, but I think it's safe to say that they've done something to provoke the Horde in the same way that probably Xena and her army may have accidentally
we know Xena
provoked.
goes around traveling and invading things that don't belong to her. That's her bag, you know?
Yeah, so she may feel like they just came out of nowhere unprovoked, but what that really means is she just doesn't understand what she did
Yeah.
to
Right.
provoke them.
Exactly. So this brings up our second huge influence for the episode, which is Zulu, directed by Cy Enfield, 1964 film.
Michael Caine's first on-screen role.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
I mean, for film.
Oh,
he was on
okay.
TV as a bunch of Cockney dudes, which is why people were worried about casting him in this role as a pasho, because they were like, Michael Caine can't do this.
Wow. Well, that's based on a true story of British Imperial Army trying to colonize Zululand.
the Anglo-Zulu War.
In 1870s.
Yeah. Zulu is an interesting movie in that it obviously is depicting these Englishmen and Welshmen as very heroic. They have this last stand at their garrison. They're hugely outnumbered, but they hold their ground and they live to the morning, and they all get awarded with medals. But the film itself is very ambivalent about colonialism and the British Empire. Like, there's the sense that the Zulu are really impressive and well organized, and they deserve their own land. The British are in a place they shouldn't be in, and they engage in this sort of arbitrary slaughter and feel sick about it afterwards, as they should. Yeah. So it's, I think, an interesting movie to invoke here in this episode, which is in some ways about white imperialism, even though it kind of tries to detach itself from that history a bit.
Side tangent, here's a TV show in the 1990s doing a hell of an impressive job of evoking a BFI 100 best film of all time, and I'm sure Apocalypse Now is also on the AFI 100 best of all time.
Sure. Top 20,
and doing it really well.
All these amazing tracking shots of the dead bodies in front of the garrison. I mean, those were just straight out of Zulu.
They have that entire garrison built, you know. They have so much expansive set to play with. And you see this, like, huge, beautiful sky, or actually in this episode, it's like huge overcast sky. And that really reminded me of Zulu 2, where you often see, like, the camera on the ground. So it's just, like, sky, overwhelming and oppressive.
All right, but we didn't talk about what actually happened to Xena and her men back when she faced the Horde originally.
They were up against a foe that really knocked them out really intensely. And then she describes what happened to her men and says that they were all tortured and skinned, which is not great.
And that she heard it all from a distance. She heard the hordes howling and the men screaming.
Yeah, I believe Steve Sears wanted to have a scene where she was kind of trapped, like away from the action on some kind of like rock or mountain or something, and saw this happening. She was helpless, couldn't do anything.
Which, as we know, is the worst thing in the world for Xena, to be helpless. That's her on the cross, rendered passive, and that's the worst.
I think just with that description of what happened with Xena in the past and this idea of them going west, obviously Zulu is a different genre, British war film, but this is very much in, you know, an American Western trope setting, where you have your heroes versus
the other.
Yeah. And their look is very specific, almost maybe overboard.
Yeah. I would say overboard.
In othering and dehumanizing them and so like in the year 2017, you see that first shot of them coming out of the water, and it's my first reaction is, this is an amazing shot. And then my second reaction is, oh no.
Where's my coin for the jar?
So once you establish that we're in this genre and that they're doing these tropes, you kind of hope that the episode is going to go where it does eventually go.
Yeah. And
we'll get to there.
Yeah, it's almost like it puts down this veil of unknowableness around the Horde. Like, what do they want? Gabs asks, and Zena's like, nobody knows. And you're like, whoa, they're so mysterious. But this episode is actually working very hard to raise that veil and be like, these are just men. These are people.
Yeah,
they have wants and needs. They have a code.
Gabrielle already is saying, they must want something.
They're people.
Yeah.
They're not some kind of magical
But Xena just doesn't
force.
care.
Yeah. But I think, the reason that Xena doesn't care is that in order to fight a force like that effectively, you have to not care. You have to think of them as not being people.
Right. And that's true, I feel like, of all war stories in general, right?
And just life in general. Steve Sears also, in an interview, mentioned how he based Xena's outlook here on the propaganda of, I think, World War II, where that propaganda really, like, dehumanizes the enemy. it's easier for you to go and do your job of killing them if you don't think that they are human.
I did like that conversation about how, I think there were some quotes where Lucy had some problems with some of the lines that Xena had based on talking about the Horde. And Steve Sears kind of addressed them by going, some of them were cut out, but some is still in there. And his whole thing is like, well, this is the point of this story. And I think it's, of course, uncomfortable for the viewer watching the person who's supposed to be the hero have these opinions. You're supposed to feel uncomfortable. You're supposed to feel that way. It's part of the point.
But he wanted to make her a lot more racist or xenophobic. LOL. But yeah, I think that's really fascinating.
I think it's a very bold choice. Yeah, I applaud him for going that far with it. And I think what's actually there in the episode is enough. I do think the few things she says directly about the Horde that really does it comes across that she does not think of them as being human. And like those moments are shocking. But you completely understand that this opinion isn't just rooted in some kind of prejudice. It's rooted in trauma. It's the fact that she endured
she experienced
this thing with her men. And for her, they were, like some kind of force of nature. She thinks of them as not being human because her experience of them in that moment was not as humans.
Right. And that is like the basis of lots of stereotypes of stuff like this, is you have one thing that then gets portrayed over a whole group of people.
Yeah, and just misunderstandings, Because you don't understand something, you decide that it's some kind of mythic, terrifying force, when in fact you just don't understand what those people are about. You think, oh, they just came at us for no reason, not understanding that, maybe we were trespassing on their sacred land.
Right.
Yeah. I don't know.
Anyway, Xena tells Gabrielle things are going to get worse. She does the whole story about what happened to her men, angrily throws the Horde axe into a tree.
That to me felt like a warning sign, not just of, how bad things are, but just how bad things are inside Xena. That feels very uncharacteristic for Xena, to just have this kind of random act of violence.
Well, the last time we saw her throw a weapon out of anger into a tree was in Girls Just Want to Have Fun, after, she was shamed by Orpheus for getting his wife killed or something.
Yeah, so this actually is a way that Xena expresses her feelings when words fail her.
Yeah.
Okay, so it isn't as uncharacteristic as I thought, but certainly that if she's doing it, it means she's reached a place emotionally where she probably is in the danger zone.
She feels helpless, like that's what she does.
So anyway, they go apocalypse nowing down the river again, and things are getting pretty intense.
Yeah, axes are flying at them, and guys are chasing them. They do save a dude.
Yeah, just a dude swimming out to them from the line of crucified men.
They don't go over the giant rainbow waterfall.
They don't, but I loved how the guy was like, he swims up to them. They sort of like grab him, and he's like, okay, let me go. And she's like, Xena's like, what is her line? She's
like, we got you now, we're keeping you, or something.
It was really good.
She really didn't want to help, but there's the Gabs influence,
That's nice, that in the end she's forced to kind of be a better person here and save someone.
I think it's really fascinating that for the majority of this episode, it's like a seesaw of her emotions, where she wants to go full dark, but there's Gabrielle always kind of just like, and then she reluctantly has to do something nice. And then, she obviously slips at a certain point all the way to full dark, and that's horrifying, but this moment here where she rescues the guy, that's a Gabrielle influence, because she's been trying to save someone this whole time on the river,
Really, the danger for Xena can be tracked in how she's treating Gabrielle. When she's listening to Gabrielle and making these concessions for Gabrielle, you know that things are still okay. But as soon as she starts to really, go off on Gabrielle and criticize Gabrielle and be really dismissive of Gabrielle, that's when you know things have gotten to a point where, she's in real emotional danger.
So now we're at the fort, and this is where we have our tracking shot of the dead Hordesmen outside of the fort. And it's interesting because we already saw a bunch of dead Athenians flowing by in the river, so now we're in the opposite territory. So you see the butchery here, and we meet our Athenian army characters. We have Mercer, played by Charles Major, who will appear in several more episodes of Xena.
Uh-huh.
And then this guy Mentacles. I don't know if he appears in more.
Probably does.
And these are kind of like the leaders of this garrison.
Well, I think Calipan, the
Right.
wounded guy, is the actual leader, but he dies right now.
Yeah.
Whoops.
Just right here at the gates. He's just
They
like,
did their
"Ugh,
best."
Yeah.
They have to be stopped, he says. They have to be. Blah. And then, I think, just to add to this sense of the butchery of the Athenians, you have Mercer just saying, put his body in the pit with the others.
Yikes.
Yeah.
So just immediately this almost carelessness that they treat even their own dead.
Yeah.
Very desperate situation.
It's real bad inside
Xena's
this fort.
basically like, these people have given up right off the bat, she can tell.
There's many times where we cut back to outside the fort and you see the various Horde's soldiers who are not quite dead. They're still alive and they're just calling out the word Kaltaka. This happens many times and we don't know what that is. But Gabrielle meets a defeated soldier and he's like, well, that's their god of war. He's a little bit like past his wits.
Yeah,
you know, a little
he's-
crazy, a little gleam of crazy in his
Yeah.
eye. This guy's name's Gabrielle, and he's played by an actor who will appear also again.
Naturally.
And I'm gonna put a pin in this,
Okay.
because I think he's the most attractive male in this entire show.
Oh, wow.
You cannot tell from this episode.
Okay, cool.
Wow.
Yeah.
I'm very intrigued.
So Xena alphas her way amongst these soldiers and takes over this army, basically.
And they need it desperately. There's dissension in the ranks. They're all so demoralized that to have this outsider coming in who's just full of such purpose and fire, you can see that they immediately respond to her. She has this great line where she says to them, if I'm going to die as I am, a warrior with a sword in my hand. Put a pin in it.
Pin it.
Pin that one.
Big pin.
But it's a big inspiration to the men because they've reached this point where they just expect themselves to die and to die horribly. So to have death depicted to them as this great noble endeavor, I think immediately cheers them up.
Yeah, and once they find out who she is, I mean, that also puts a spring in their step.
She also yells at them and beats them up. Which
Well, that's her alpha aim.
they certainly respond to that.
Yeah.
So I have a note in this scene where, and I don't mean to sound blasphemous because I love these, but there were a few like head whoosh sound effects and things like that, like where I first noticed them in this episode, and I felt like they were really out of place. Like, I
Really?
didn't want them here.
What about the one in
'Cause it
the
was
debt?
so serious.
When you were like, there's one in the debt where you were like, when we were first watching it, you go, they really stay true to these, don't they?
I think that might be the same feeling that I'm having here. Like, sometimes I want it to be just not there.
I
Sorry,
didn't
blaspheme. I'll
notice it.
show myself out. Goodbye.
I mean, it's so special to Xena.
I know.
That you can sample Francis Ford Coppola and Cy Enfield and then be like, also, whooshes!
I'm
like the
leaving.
Stooges.
It's okay. I'm leaving now. It's okay. But yeah, I something about it, just the tone. I was like, oh, don't go there.
This is very grim. This fortress is just the absolute worst place in the world. And you immediately already have Xena going to a place where you know she should not be going emotionally. And you can feel this intensity in this episode. So to have it undercut with these little noises, I get it. I get your feelings.
Right.
Even though it's, that's embedded in Xena.
I know, it's the DNA.
Like, what can you do?
Didn't we worry a little bit about Xena in Greek Spirit Gifts, whether it's dangerous for her to be in a fort with soldiers, possibly suggesting things to them, possibly starting to take over and lead them?
I believe Xena is more, she defers to the leadership in charge, like, for Troy for the most part. Like, there isn't as much of a desperate need for her to be the commander, and I think she's grateful for it. She has people like Perdiccas around, these, like, career soldiers who know what they're doing, and she doesn't really have to step up and be that person. We also talked a long time ago now, in Hooves and Harlots, about, why isn't Xena an Amazon? Because to have that army under her control would absolutely be a temptation for her to revert to her old ways. So I think it makes sense. Here is a situation perfectly calibrated to tempt her because these guys have a huge power vacuum. They need a leader. They need her to step up and be that person who gives them orders. So she feels in this moment that she's doing the right thing. And for all intents and purposes, she is. She needs to inspire these guys. She needs to say these things. Maybe she's being a little harsh about it. Maybe she's being a little cruel. Maybe she's not listening to Gabrielle, but she's still doing what she thinks is right.
Well, that's because she's Xena of Corinth, first of her name, the warrior princess of Kelmai.
What the hell is Kelmai?
Mother of dragons.
Yeah, the one who defeated Callisto.
Corinth we got. Kelmai I couldn't find. Did you guys find?
No, I haven't found anything about
Somebody
Kelmai.
let us know.
Yeah, please let us know.
Maybe it's in one of the comics.
Oh my god. So these guys are like, tell us what to do, Xena. And, her response, we're going to kill them all.
Mm-hmm.
Kill them all. It's pretty epic.
Great finale of Spartacus season 1.
Oh my god, yes.
And she tells them, if anything moves between the trees, kill it. And Gabrielle says, but what if it's a friend? And she's like, we don't have any friends right now. I think that right now is important, in the sense that she's like, this is temporary, okay?
Yeah.
We have to think this way in this moment, but soon we'll be thinking in a different way. Mm-hmm. Right now, even now, you have this concession to Gabrielle. Don't worry about me. I need to do this.
Right. So, as a audience member, I don't know, were you sitting around being like, oh no? I was like, oh, it's okay. She's still got it. It's actually similar to what was going on in The Ties That Bind, when she takes over that army for a second. And I was like, it's okay. She's still got it. She's still got it.
I think it's a little disconcerting to hear yell, kill them all.
Kill
I'm
them
with
all's
the
bad.
reaction shots of Gabrielle.
Never do kill them all.
You get these reaction shots of Gabrielle and everyone's enthusiasm in this moment. And she's getting very distraught and concerned. So I am a little bit with her. This episode is a lot of great reaction shots and looks that are very subtle and good.
I think this episode is superior to Ties That Bind.
Yeah.
But
it doesn't have Ares.
But even beyond, some of the plot differences in these two episodes, I think in Ties That Bind it really is like a switch. They kill the person she thinks is her father, those villagers, and she just goes nuts.
Right.
It's just bam, I'm Dark Xena. Here you have this slowly escalating situation where she first, starts making these decisions, and you're worried about her, but you're hoping she can handle it. And it eventually gets worse and worse and worse. And I think that's really carefully done by Steve Sears. Yeah. I think it really is natural. It's that slippery slope where you don't realize how bad it is until it's bad.
Mm-hmm.
It's a much better episode, and you sort of wanted all the ones that dealt with her past, obviously Death Mask and all that stuff, to just be set up in such an organic way that the payoff is exceptional. Here it is, the whole point of this episode is Xena hanging out in a bar. What will she do,
Yeah, and unlike other episodes where it's a little bit, Ties That Bind, I feel cheats a little bit. It's such emotional manipulation on Aries' part, whereas this is just such a natural situation.
But that's, that's season 1. That's season 1. That's Babytown Frolics. We're just dipping our toes into what a good episode of Xena can really do. Here, we've done Destiny. We've done all these really epic ones already. This is where it's at.
Yeah.
We're ready for
it's
this
almost
emotional...
it's a remake of Ties That Bind in a lot of ways.
Yeah, it's a fix it. So as Xena takes command of the army, Gabrielle moves into her position here, which is in the infirmary.
This is also indebted to Zulu, where you have the action in and around the garrison, and then almost like a whole separate subplot that happens inside the hospital.
Most war movies, I feel kind of always have the nurse part.
Yeah, it actually kind of reminds me of the Game of Thrones episode Blackwater.
My favorite episode.
It is a fantastic episode because it has all of that expansive action in and around King's Landing, but then you also have in the Keep the scenes with Cersei and Sansa that are very emotional and personal. So you have these very personal stakes wedded to this big, grand action.
I know this is not a Game of Thrones podcast, but that is literally the only reason that episode is the best one they've ever done, is because they have the massive war movie going on, but the heart of the episode is the keep where the women are.
Yeah. And here in The Price, the heart is Gabrielle.
Mm-hmm.
Gabrielle in that hospital. She's the moral compass. She's here in this room, trying to make something good out of this terrible situation. And then Xena walks into the place and immediately ruins it.
Can you love the line where she's like, here we go again?
Yeah, Gabrielle gearing herself up to be in this situation. I would hope that in her head, she is thinking about at least what we have seen, which is there a doctor in the house? Mm-hmm. A previous time where Gabrielle herself died. So she might
right.
be nervous right now about the situation.
And she died going out to help the wounded.
Exactly.
So you immediately have a lot of parallels between Doctor and The Price.
I thought she went out to help a little girl.
A little boy, a
little kid.
Yeah. She went out to help
an innocent.
She leaves the safety of the garrison. Yeah.
You mentioned how Xena comes in and immediately ruins it. She is there to instruct Gabrielle to not give the wounded any food or water, like the seriously wounded. Only focus on the walking wounded, who would then not be nurses, as Gabrielle had instructed them to be, but to go and hold the sword, go onto the wall.
Xena has this really bleak view of things in which you divide people into two categories, the dead and the living. And the living have to defend the garrison. They can't help people who are already too injured.
And they even come up with a use for the dead, because there's no actual reinforcements coming, so they have to make the Horde think that they are reinforced. So she instructs Gabrielle to basically hand over the ones that die, so they can put them on the wall.
This I call siege at Bernie's. Insensitive.
Is this when Gabrielle grabs her by the arms real cute?
Yeah, but that's before Xena is a little shit.
Yeah, but it's cute anyways.
I think that's really important because this episode has like the two arm grabs between them. Like, this is the first one. It's a good one. Gabrielle's happy to see Xena.
She's proud. Yeah.
And then
I've organized this so well.
Yeah.
I'm going to save these men's lives. Look at me wearing my bloodstained apron. Like, I know what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And Xena's just like, I don't care. What you're doing isn't important to me. We're going to string these dudes up on the walls. And you're just like,
right.
What? Oh, my God. Also, I mean, the implication here is that she's telling Gabs that she has to start deciding who's going to live and who's going to die.
Yeah, and Gabrielle...
Right.
Basically imperiling Gabrielle's blood innocence. And it is, I think, the worst thing Xena has ever done to Gabrielle.
Yeah, and
to put her in that position.
Gabrielle immediately to herself was just like, I can't do this.
I mean, that's a real difficult aspect of wartime triage in general. I mean, you
have to make those decisions.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, human life means something different. Every life isn't sacred. You have to begin to rank them. And that's immediately a way of dehumanizing people.
Yeah.
Certain people are more worthy. Certain people should live and certain people should not. I mean, that's a terrible way to think about human life. It's rough.
The Horde attack, and it's really scary, and oh my God, like, are they going to lose or what? What's happening? They seem to be losing a little bit, the Athenians, that is. And the Horde sort of make it into the fort. But
It's a lot of gritty camera work here. Lots of handheld, lots of really close angles of action, which you don't usually do because it generally doesn't look like two people actually trying to kill each other. Whereas here, like, the stunt people are really throwing themselves into it, and it looks really violent and great.
But then it turns out that it was all a setup. Once the Horde are inside the fort, our guys, the Athenians,
The archers, like, bust out of barrels.
yeah,
They're
exactly.
just like, hey!
Yeah, they're like hiding in there. Yeah, it turns out that Xena set all this up.
This fight also has the really epic Xena music over
The Warrior Princess theme.
Yes,
Yeah.
that one, which we have not heard, I believe, since Destiny, in the flashback sequence when Xena becomes extra evil Xena.
It becomes extra. Yeah. Yes.
And that was also, I think, the most violent, brutal fight scene that we've had prior to the Prius.
Yeah.
Right, and one key move that Xena did there that she replicates here is slit a guy's throat with his own weapon.
Right.
Which Gabrielle witnesses here and is really fucking stunned about.
Yeah, she screams.
So this is like warning bells are going off.
Oh, yeah.
This is the alcoholic after a few drinks. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
We didn't mention this, but there is really interesting music in this episode just generally because I love that you get the Warrior Princess theme a lot when you're in the Athenian fort, and then there's also this sort of male vocal music that's associated with the Horde. It's kind of interesting, so back and forth
female
play.
And male.
Interesting.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Not sure what that means, but that is interesting.
I just think that it's
just
really
evocative
thought out
music.
episode all around, you know. I mean, not that I'm the team that makes this show is thinking about it all the time.
Absolutely.
But like this is particular, some episodes are just, every aspect of it is really thought out. I think this one goes
and
into
it's
that
so
direction.
in touch with everything that's come before, everything that's been set up. Like here you have, after this great military triumph, the men shout Xena, Xena, Xena. Yeah. And we've heard them do that. We've heard them do that all the way back in Hercules when she was a military leader. We've heard them do it when Callisto was pretending to be Xena, an intimate stranger. Her men were shouting Xena. This is something that we are to understand is so central to Xena's early life as a warlord. It's hearing men do that. Ties that bind. Yeah, this is almost like the siren call of that lifestyle for Xena. Is men saying Xena.
It's the opposite of the actual sirens.
Yeah.
The riff-off.
Xena throws an axe, one of the Hordeman's axe, into the back of a retreating member of the Horde.
Right.
That
one
is
guy who escaped.
Yeah, that is really brutal that she kills even those who have, for all intents and purposes, surrendered.
Right. I mean, he escaped, and her reasoning was that he saw the inside of their garrison, so he knows exactly what's going on, which is a logical thing to do. I mean...
But at the same time, I feel like the fact that she thinks like that shows that she acknowledges the humanity of these guys, that they have some form of communication, that this guy is going to go back to his commanders and be like, I saw this, here's what we need to do. I feel like she's always juggling the slide where you're like, you are admitting that these are human beings, but you're also treating them like they're not.
You bring up communication. We have not heard these guys communicate amongst themselves except for... the one word Kaltaka.
Yeah, I noticed in the fight scene that they almost just hiss and kind of... It sounds like zombies. They're kind of just like...
Yeah, they're very othered.
Yeah, very othered, yeah. Gabrielle is really disturbed by that Xena, Xena chant. And she goes and hides in a closet just to sulk.
Is it a closet or is it the supply room?
It's like
it's the supply room for the hospital. So Xena comes and looks for her there, and they have this really intense argument.
This scene is amazing.
Yeah. Maybe the best scene of the episode, as the scene goes.
There are like 3 best scenes when it comes to these two in this episode.
Well, I love this scene because the way that it's filmed is amazing. Because it's one take, right? So they go back and forth. It's like a little dance between them.
Yes, it's
they
like spinning camera.
And the camera circles around them.
Their subjectivity, very intense. Yes.
And you have the bad hand grab by Xena in this one.
Just grabs her shoulders in a really possessive and violent way.
And in this fight... Gabrielle says, Xena's like, there's no good choices in war, just like the lesser of evils. Yeah. And Gabrielle's like, no, you can choose to stop fighting. A big thing for Gabrielle, but also an interesting thing to say in this situation where what does stopping fighting mean? They might just all be killed immediately. So who's right? Nobody's right. Everyone's right. What's going on? Which is why the camera moving around is so great, because you're in this sort of conundrum.
I love some of these dialogue choices. Like, I love how Gabrielle's like, what is going on with you? That's just such a great line.
This is the moment when Xena is racist against the Horde. When she says, there's nothing you can or should understand about them.
Yeah.
This very almost moral declaration that she's just like, they're not worth trying to understand. Which is a terrible thing to say. And, you know, it's subtle, but I think it's very meaningful. Again, props to them for going there with the character.
Absolutely. I mean, you're always safe because Gabrielle is your point of view of the audience, you know, like Gabrielle's there, you know, eventually it'll be fine. She could smack Xena over the head with a shovel and she'll revert, you know, we've seen that happen before.
Right, and I mean, that's precisely why I think this is so superior to Ties That Bind, because Ties That Bind told that story in such like grand strokes.
Right,
Like Gabrielle brings Xena to her senses by standing up to her and knocking her over the head.
Yeah.
Here, she can't knock her over the head. She has to talk to her. They
Like, this
have
is a
to communicate.
realistic example of this. I mean, honestly, like, this is the kind of shit that would have half a season of setup and then like the big, you know, 2 episodes of a finale nowadays, I think.
That's true. And I think it's speaking very well of this episode that it doesn't feel rushed to me. It feels very well paced. There's huge payoff, and you feel the subtlety of the way in which this conflict is being built. You have quite a few scenes between Xena and Gabrielle before it really reaches breaking point. This isn't even the breaking point, the scene we're talking about now. So I do think it's very well done.
It's like a mini
considering
rift
the ambition.
them.
It is maybe not a mini rift, a
steps rift.
mid-size rift. Yeah.
Xena takes a Horde soldier captive with the intention of interrogating him.
At first, to Gabrielle's eyes, it looks like Xena's saving a man's life. She
Right.
goes out to the battlefield, crawls among the wounded, and takes this man inside the walls as if for medical treatment.
Right.
But of course, that's not what she has in mind. Instead, she puts the pinch on him in an effort to question.
This seems like such a shock to Gabrielle, but literally, like,
She puts the pinch on people all the
the
damn time.
Yeah, it's like such a common thing.
But I guess here, because it's clear that this man does not speak Greek, there's no real communication that can happen under the pinch.
She shows them a map.
That's
and
true.
is like,
Point
to where
Yeah.
you are. I mean, she's doing her best
But that
to communicate
presupposes
with
that you
them.
understand a map,
That's
which
true.
is not
I don't
necessarily...
understand maps, so it's fine.
Xena isn't really trying to communicate with these guys. You do feel that her whole decision to take this man captive is sadistic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the whole language of the scene being filmed in terms of differentiating it from other times she's done the pinch, and Gabrielle's reaction here is that Xena has taken a man into captivity to torture him for information. I mean, that's just not how you think of the pinch, even though maybe that kind of is what it is. But here, that's how it's being presented, as this war, you know, technique that Gabrielle is horrified by.
I do think that they were worried that it would be too dark at points. So, for instance, I would have liked to see a true evil Xena interrogation here, where, let's say, she does the pinch repeatedly on him, you know, like, because he doesn't say anything. We've never seen that before. We won't ever see that.
Oh, that's good. That's good, dude.
Yeah, well, I believe that...
That's for the reboot.
One of the drafts of the script, I believe, had a scene where she put the pinch on him and started walking away, you know, and Gabrielle is like, oh my God, you're going to let him die. And she tries to take it off, and it doesn't work. And he's, like, bleeding from the nose and stuff, and I think they...
Felt that was going too far.
Yeah, but again, like, the last time you saw that was Destiny. I mean, it's...
Yeah.
They're referencing that big time.
Absolutely. Yeah, the fact that you're seeing Xena use these familiar and at this point almost beloved aspects of her kind of heroic persona to torture someone, I mean, that's really dark. So because Gabrielle is questioning Xena's methods in this moment publicly in front of her troops.
Oh, we're getting to the best scene ever.
Xena goes off on her, and this scene is fucking amazing.
Yeah, it is.
Oh, did I say that other scene was the best? This is the best.
This is the best. Until we get to the next best one.
Yeah. They fight again.
I mean, at this
about
point, they're not even fighting because Gabrielle is saying you're doing something wrong. They're fighting because Xena
is chastising her.
Is chastising her for just sort of being her friend. Like, how dare you talk to me when I'm trying to be an evil warlord?
Yeah, I mean, the words that come out of her mouth are kind of like, how dare you question my authority in front of my troops? And the keywords that Gabrielle picks up are, your troops? What? And then the voice changes.
Okay, when we watched this to prepare for the podcast, I quite embarrassingly just lost it in the middle of the scene.
So good.
When Xena's voice adjusts in pitch so that she's doing Warlord Xena voice that we first heard in Hercules, and that up till now I've sort of been describing a little bit disparagingly. I find it a little ridiculous that she has this higher pitched vampy voice that is her evil voice. Here, Lucy is so amazing in that she so slowly reaches that point where her voice takes on that quality that it was magical. I just could not contain my stuff. I just started shrieking in the middle of our preparation session, and everybody laughed at me.
No, it was amazing. I mean,
we're all there with you.
That's the best part, is just to hear a natural reaction to this awesome that we're watching, So I love Gabrielle. When she hears this, she goes, you, because she knows.
She recognizes this voice
that is.
and this person.
Even though she's never met her, technically.
Ties that bind, I suppose, very briefly. But yeah, I do love that she knows this isn't Xena, and that this has reached a point where she is actually dealing with a different person.
Right.
What happened to the Xena that I know?
Right. That Xena can help us now. If losing her is the price for saving us all, I'll pay it.
The price.
It's just a part of me I didn't think I'd need anymore, which I was like, wow. Yeah. That's amazing.
So is this actually a very tragic story? This is Xena seeing a bunch of people in trouble and says, I will sacrifice myself, my redemption arc, everything that I've fought for and managed to achieve. I'm going to throw it all away to save these men's lives. I mean, it's heroic in this way that she's going back to this dark place because she feels she has to, and that's the only reason. It's not like she's doing it for glory, for money, all those things that motivated her back in the day when she was a pirate. Those aren't important anymore. She's doing it to save someone's life, and she's aware of that. She's aware of it as a price that she's paying.
I guess she wouldn't be in this situation if she wasn't running around with Gabrielle, right? Would she be doing it if Gabrielle wasn't there?
Well, she'd be dead if Gabrielle wasn't there because she would have died in the pilot.
Well, that's what I mean. It's one of those things where it's like, how much of it is I'm going to save these men, like you said, versus Gabrielle's here too.
We briefly mentioned Dreamworker, and that is the episode where Xena explained that her dark side is like a rock underneath a pond, that it's always there. And I mean, obviously...
She fights her dark side.
She does fight her, yes, and she has a higher pitched voice, like she does here.
Yeah, and there it felt so silly. It was like Jekyll and Hyde, like these are two distinct personalities warring for control of the body,
I mean, one just took over, literally. You saw it happen.
We saw it happen, but you understand that this isn't like a binary. It's not like there's Xena and there's Warlord Xena, that they're the same person. That the more she engages in this behavior, the more she reverts to being that person she used to be. But there's no switch flicking. Even though that voice suddenly is apparent, we've heard it all along. We just haven't recognized it until this moment. And I think that's what's so magical about this. There's no suddenly I'm doing a voice. No, it all suddenly resolves for you. You feel it in a way that you didn't feel it up till now. I think it's immensely subtle in this way. And it's really amazing.
Yeah, and I just love the fact that, again, she has been very upfront about the fact that this could happen to her at any given moment. And here is a situation where it does. And we see the full effects of this. So Gabrielle huffs away back to her supply room. And that's where that soldier, the Horde soldier, is chained up. And she's getting water. And the guy's like, Keltaka. And she's... realizes that, he means this water.
Keltaka means water.
Wow.
It's not the god of war. These guys aren't just wholly set on bloodshed and cruelty. They're just people who, in their dying moments, are thirsty.
Just tiny jump. We didn't mention how great of a parallel it was that the Athenian army who were strung up on the banks were calling for Athena, and supposedly... the Horde are calling for Keltaka, their war god.
I see, yeah.
So actually, this is a transference. They're saying, calling for your god at this moment. Oh, how dare you? Though I think they're like the god of war, which obviously Athena is not.
No.
But
she is their patron god, their Athenian army, you know?
Yeah,
so.
but it shows how much the Athenians want to read in their own values and way of life onto the Horde.
Right.
And that just is not a way of actually understanding other people.
Yeah. So it means water, and I like how Gabrielle sort of uses the soldier as like her shrink. She just like talks about Xena to him.
Yeah.
I don't know how sensitive that is. This poor guy's been tortured, and she's like, I want you to listen as I just internal monologue at you.
And Gabrielle talks about her own version of that line that Xena said.
The price. She says, it's such a mess. It's you, it's them, it's Xena. What's become of her? It's not human. That's the price, isn't it? Losing your humanity. So she sees the cost of war, and the price is the cost of war.
Right, that's another reference title.
Yeah. So having come to this revelation that the price of war is losing your humanity, Gabrielle resolves not to pay that price. She's going to die on her own terms, which means her way, which is showing compassion. So she goes out to give the dying Horde warriors some water, because that's what they've been calling for.
I love that the next shot is Xena freaking out, and it's expressed in this amazing tracking shot of her
over her shoulder,
running, on the ramparts to see with her own eyes that this is happening.
Yeah, she's very angry.
She's so pissed.
She yells at one of the dudes, like, you let her out!
Who let the Gabs out?
No, please. Woo. Oh my god. Gosh. I don't understand how I'm friends with y'all.
Oh my god.
But it's weird. It's quite a line. It's very revealing. It's like she's a prisoner. You let her out.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, I mean...
for a lot of this episode, it's starting with when they were on the river, and she wanted her to go off and be safe somewhere, you know, because the last thing that Xena wants is to worry about Gabrielle, and that's kind of like the first thing she always does. So here, she's out. They could get her. She wasn't supposed to go out there. Now she has to worry about her.
It's the part of herself that's human. She's like, what's that doing out here? I locked that away. And
that's
now
mine.
It's running around doing things.
We didn't talk about one of my favorite parts of Xena here, where that guy Mentacles questions her commands several times, and Xena's response is always, do it. I just really love how she says, do it, continuously to this guy.
Agreed.
Well, you just know this is part of, like, her strategy always being a warlord. There's always that one guy who's questioning her, and she knows how to put it down. She knows how to just bite that in the bud. So then the Horde come up to Gabs out on the battlefield, and for a second it looks like she's in some real trouble. There's this great evocative shot of the legs of one of the warriors coming into frame, and he's got a dripping axe, and you see it just lowered into the shot with Gabs looking up at him, and you're like, oh shit.
Yeah, it's a commercial break. You're like, oh no, she's dead!
Basically.
But rather than taking her hostage or killing her or anything like that, they just take their own wounded away, and they leave her be.
Mm-hmm.
And the Athenians then go out and get their wounded too.
So the Horde assume that this is a truce, which means that the Horde understand the concept of a truce, which immediately points to a very sophisticated understanding of warfare.
Yeah.
I do love that Xena ordered all the Athenians to kill anything near Gabrielle that moved, if anything was going to hurt her, just because I have to point that out. Okay, good day. Continue on.
So Gabs ends up back inside the fort. She's safe. But also Mercer they find out on the battlefield.
Right, this guy was supposed to go get reinforcements. He was supposed to sneak off amidst some smoke bombs and all that. But, oh no, that was a failure.
Reinforcements coming.
No reinforcements, and he's been hurt. So he comes back and delivers this news. They are foobar.
Yeah, they are foobar, and Gabs turns to Xena and says, looks like you have your fight to the death.
Yeah, she's so pissed.
And this is the kind of critical moment for Xena, when she realizes, the horror that she has wrought. And it's a huge wake-up call for her.
one of the ways that she expresses her new awakened self is by sending the wounded back to the hospital to help there and, not continuously man the wall, to get food to the sick, etc.
Basically saying in a passive-aggressive way, Gabs, you were right.
Yeah.
You're in charge now.
She knows she's in the doghouse. Who let the Gabs out?
No, stop, please, no, please.
Sorry.
I hate you.
Let's talk about the scene where Xena goes back to that captive horseman and frees him, and somehow in all of this she figured out that he only wants to fight someone of equal rank as him.
It's really wild. As soon as she kind of comes out of her haze of warlording, her warrior haze, she realizes that she understands quite a bit about the Horde's values. She understands that they recognize leadership, that they have this whole idea of who is worthy of fighting the person who's the leader. And she tests this theory by letting... Who let the captive out? Woo, woo. And he just he's willing to fight everybody around her, Mercer and Mezicles, but he does not fight her.
Yeah, he goes out of his way.
And that's how she realizes that the only way of settling this is for her to fight the leader of the Horde.
Yeah. So now we're back in the hospital, and Gabrielle is tending to a wounded man, and in the background you see Xena kind of slink in there.
Yeah.
She wants to make peace.
Yeah, I love how long they let her just look at Gabrielle doing what she's doing. You have sort of a more establishing shot of the scene where you can see Xena looking at Gabrielle from behind, and then there's more of a closer look at Lucy making these amazing faces. This whole scene is about Luke's. I can't talk about it. Somebody else talk about it. Oh my god, my emotions.
Xena says, I let my fear and hatred blind me to everything. And Gabrielle, I think with a certain amount of noble...
Yeah.
Yeah, she says, no, sometimes the past can do that. She does not twist the knife at all. She's like, no, Xena, you shouldn't feel too bad. It makes sense that you were having some PTSD about this situation, and it changed the way you think. But Xena obviously is not having it. She's like, don't forgive me. I don't want to be forgiven. She has these wonderful lines, which, Katie, I somehow feel like you are the person who has to talk about this. You understand hatred, but you've never given into it. You don't know how much I love...
that... ... So how was this written, do we think?
Yeah, this is my number one mystery. I really want to see those lines on the script because I want to say that it's performance choice. I want to say she chooses to put that pause in there.
The pause between love and that, yeah.
And just thinking about screenwriting training, you don't put in performance choices. You don't put in where someone should put a significant pause.
Yeah, sometimes you do if you can really...
If it's really important to the plot.
Feel it, yeah.
But, this, I think, it feels like a choice. It feels like something an actor chose to do to kind of bring something else into the scene.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it really changes that line. I mean, you could easily have her say, you don't know how much I love that. We would be sitting here going, oh, that's so great. Look at that. It's a great scene. But the fact that there is that pause.
And you feel it even after she said that. You can tell that she's sort of I did it. I sort of did it. I almost said it. She's kind of reeling from this moment.
Yeah. It's really beautiful. And then Xena takes over for Gabrielle doing the nursing, and Gabrielle then looks at Xena. Actually, she turns her head right on the pause there, the love in that, and kind of does not look away for the remainder of the scene as Xena tends to the wounded guy. Is really beautiful. It's as much as I love the dialogue in the scene and the pause and all that it entails, I think that just the looking, the way it begins with Xena looking at Gabrielle and the way it ends with Gabrielle looking at Xena is my favorite part of the whole scene.
Yeah, I love that you can tell, just as much as you can tell in Lucy's performance and her choice to put that pause before the word that, you can tell in Renee's performance as Gabrielle looks at Xena that what she's seeing there is her Xena.
Yeah.
She recognizes the one that she's always been wanting to see here in this episode, the one that went away. So she's finally back, and it feels safe now again. There's a really great quote from Steve Sears in an interview regarding this moment, where we already talked about the rock under the pond. So Steve goes, Xena was formed by survival, and her security is that she can survive by going to the dark Xena in her mind. I keep saying it, that's home for her. Xena has much more respect for Gabrielle than Gabrielle had for Xena, because Xena can't understand why someone would not have a dark side.
It's interesting hearing Xena say that kind of thing to Gabrielle. It makes me think of the execution where Xena warned Gabrielle about putting people on pedestals. It introduces,
she fell hard in this one.
Right, the possibility that they're going to fall off. Here, we're beginning to understand that Xena herself is putting Gabrielle on a pedestal of goodness, of purity. This person who is too innocent, who, is going to hold on to her goodness no matter what. And we might not realize it now, but this, too, actually is a dangerous thing to do for Xena, to treat Gabrielle this way. But here it's very beautiful and moving.
Put it in there. Put it in there. Well, the conclusion of this episode is this fight between Xena and the leader, which I think is no longer the emotional part of this episode at all. I mean, they make him look like a giant. She's fighting her.
I do like the moment where they switch weapons.
I do think that's really great. I mean, and honestly, that's the key to her winning. He grabs her sword in his palm and does that really baller move of, this doesn't affect me at all. But in that process, they switch weapons, and he just does not know how to wield a sword at all. But Xena's so badass that she can, totally wield his crazy axe nunchuck thing. And she ends up winning. But this could be a problematic situation.
Yeah, why can't this guy use a sword?
Yeah.
It's just a long, pointy version of his machete.
Maybe it's another reference to Zulu, where they did have rifles, but they didn't know how to use them. They have found, Zulu warriors had found the rifles, but they didn't know quite how to implement them in a powerful way like they're meant to be implemented. I don't know, but it was his downfall.
It also makes me think of the Maori, who were given muskets and powder and massacred each other, massacred rival clans. That, introducing these Western weapons was a horrible thing for these cultures.
Probably to some extent the Native American tribes as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
We haven't mentioned it, but the Horde weapon of choice, this axe, is most certainly a reference to tomahawks.
Yeah, and it's the only weapon they seem to wield. It's so closely associated with them, other than these machetes that the leader has. Because
Xena beats the leader, she
seems to spare his life. She has the opportunity
she does not
to
kill him. Yeah. And the Horde follow a code of honor, and so this guy is supposed to, well, number one, he's supposed to be dead, because really it is supposed to be a fight to the death. But because he's not, it seems like he's going to attack her again, and the rest of the Horde throw their axes at him.
The Athenians think that the axes are being thrown at them, and they're like, oh no, the battle's starting up again.
Yeah.
But they're all directed at this leader. So Xena lets them kind of work it out amongst themselves, which on the one hand, you're like, okay, I'm glad this is, Xena understanding their culture, and Xena sparing herself from having this guy's blood on her hands. But you're also like, yikes, Xena, you forced these guys to have to kill their own man rather than you just doing the honorable thing and executing him according to their tribal law.
Maybe it would have been real bad for her if she actually ended up killing another guy, especially a Horde guy.
About that.
Yeah.
It's complicated. These moments in the episode, there isn't a right thing to do, I think. Even this moment that's being presented as the right way of behaving, you can't help but have questions about it.
The episode ends with Xena and Gabrielle wistfully discussing the Horde and whether the Horde will be returning for another episode or not, which it will be.
They will.
There's a really great line where Xena's like, I just hope that wherever the Horde is from, they have a Gabrielle.
Potentially problematic based on the next Horde episode.
Well, I think here she means a nice Horde person who is thinking about the other side as well, but yes, kind of.
Does it need a preemptive?
Preemptive or not?
Preemptive and just like another one, just generally.
Yeah,
just generally, what is our general opinion of the Horde to wrap up? Okay. All right.
I mean, it's frustrating because I admire the ambition of this story, and I admire the fact that it is so influenced by these anti-imperialist source texts like Zulu and Apocalypse Now. It doesn't quite go there in that it's not saying that the Athenians are imperialists, which I suppose could make you say, oh, this episode is kind of leaving them off the hook. Like they did nothing wrong. They're just being attacked by the Horde because war is hell and nobody's at fault.
Yeah.
And you're like, no, actually in most of these cases, like the white imperialist invading forces were at fault.
Yes.
They were in places they shouldn't have been. And like, oh no, like the heart of darkness, like, wow, we have stumbled into this thing and it's turning us evil. And it's like, no, like, you guys brought this shit with you. You didn't find it there.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I needed to see any of that in this episode. I'm not sure if it really should have gone there, but it is a bit of a... I think that's why I have mixed feelings about the way the Horde is presented here. Because they're so influenced by these sources, but in the end... they don't exactly turn it around on the Athenians and say these guys are responsible for what happened here.
Right. It is kind of doing a very explicit version of stuff that has been done before in a way where you're like, oh, surprise, they are actually people too. And, our heroes learn a lesson. And I think it's a really great story. And this is clearly like one of my favorite episodes of Xena. It's incredible. The problem isn't really with the story that it's doing, but just the entirety of Hollywood and the Western canon of cinema, really.
Yeah.
For like, you just have these very established tropes and very established ways of presenting people who are not our white heroes. And it is problematic, to use the appropriate word.
Yeah, I mean, I was about to launch in and defend it, being like, oh, but it's such a great episode for Xena. But even that is an absurd and possibly racist way of thinking about a story like this. Like, it shouldn't just be material for your hero to confront their dark side and learn a lesson. Like, that's frustrating too. Even though it's great. It is a great episode. Yeah.
For me, the struggle is that obviously the representation is problematic. We've discussed this. Yes. Put it in there. But I love the fact that you have an enemy for Xena that scares her, that is new. I was trying to come up with ways of making this episode without having, like, the Horde, right? If you had just a general army, that doesn't scare Xena. She can take care of a general other army. It's totally fine. We've seen her
she
deal
needs
with
somebody
men.
who she doesn't understand.
Right.
Someone who she's gonna mythologize in that way.
Right, but so speaking of mythology, the next thought is, well, this is a world where literal monsters walk around. Like, why can't this be a monster? Like, well, number one, that's Hercules territory, and we don't want to go there. And what makes Xena the best show is that it deals with the human aspect of reality. So you want to see her fight some humans. You want to see these conflicts fleshed out. It has to be a human foe, right? But they go out of their way to sort of dehumanize them. It reminded me of the Borg from Star Trek TNG, which were a new villain created to be, like, extra scary. Different from the Klingons.
That's interesting that you mentioned Star Trek, because I wouldn't have made that initial connection with the Horde to the Borg. I think that if I'm thinking about contemporary space drama westerns, my first thought is always going to be Firefly. And I think in this scenario, the Horde is kind of the Reavers of the world.
Yeah, I can see that.
And yeah, so that's kind of like my touchstone for this thing. And Firefly gets away with it as a Western, I think, because they're just, the Reavers were just people from Miranda who got drugged, what happened, whatever.
They got,
Firefly spoilers.
Zombified almost.
Right, exactly. And they're not people from a particular marginalized group.
Firefly was canceled. Hashtag get over it. Now can we get back to the Borg, please?
Yes.
Because that's legit. The Borg are made up of people, but they're assimilated to be a hive. It's like a hive mind.
What's interesting metaphor, because as viewers, we know that the Horde is not going to be a assimilated hive mind, but the way we are associated with Xena as a hero, like the Horde is just this kind of relentless force that just keeps attacking. So they are just this kind of collective.
Yeah, and I think the resistance is futile kind of saying from the Borg, it's all about the unknown. So this was a new villain. This was mechanical villain. It was different than all the other villains that they've had so far, which were races that you could reason with. Here, it's like you fire at them and then they adapt to your weapons and then they get you to be part of their hive. So I feel like with the Horde, it's like they don't know, like this enemy is so unstoppable that you can't reason with it, and that's why it's scary.
It's funny, like, I don't know any Star Treks, but, like, hearing you say, like, the Hive versus the Horde, like, we haven't really thought about, like, the significance of the name the Horde, which kind of is a depersonalizing name. Like, each of these individuals is caught up in this mass.
Well, there's your zombie connection.
Right, because they do call them the Horde, the zombie Horde.
Well, I think this is all, I mean, the idea of, I mean, I talked about how the sound effect where the Horde attack is right out of a zombie movie. You have this idea that your threat isn't human anymore, and that gives you permission to kill them. And I think that is very much the way that zombie media now uses these tropes, as saying, like, you can commit violence on your enemy because your enemy is not a human.
I personally don't quite go to the zombie route here because I do think that it is more wartime dehumanization. Which is
Absolutely.
Well, I think zombies are that. Zombies are a fictionalized version of that wartime idea. It's like, how can you make that horrible mindset acceptable? It's by creating this threat that isn't human and that you're allowed to feel this way about. But really, I mean, there is no such thing. Zombies are a kind of consoling fantasy for just this reason, that it allows your heroes to be violent in this way that I don't think they really ought to be. Like, there should be a cost to violence. There should be a price, the price of this episode. And for me, something like The Walking Dead doesn't have that price, that cost of the humanity. All right.
Well, they would say otherwise if they think that is probably like the only topic that they have, but that is neither here nor there. So anyway, we're in an area where we're dealing with a lot of tropes and stuff from Westerns, and they're going to come back again when the Horde returns to Xena, which is an episode that does another really big, famous Western, The Searchers. So
put a pin in it.
Put a pin in it. Lots of cinematic references in Xena all around.
Cool. So this was The Price, and you can follow us on all the things.
Yes, you can. We are on Twitter at Xena Warrior Pod. You can listen on all of the places. iTunes, please subscribe. You can rate and leave a review if you're enjoying the podcast. We always appreciate those. We're also doing fun stuff on Facebook and Tumblr. You can find us at Xena Warrior Podcast.
The power.
The passion.
The podcast!